thanks everyone. Sorry. Thanks everyone for coming. So yeah, as you'll see, we're going to record the first sort of little section of this session, just while all of our sort of speakers are talking, just so it can be sent to sort of GSA staff or students that haven't been able to make it today. But if you've got any questions while anyone's talking, you can pop them in the chat, because we will have time sort of at the end to do a sort of Q&A, or you can come on screen and ask them yourselves if you're comfortable, because we won't record that bit at the end. We'll just sort of leave that more kind of as an open sort of discussion. So yeah, I'll introduce myself. So I'm Megan. I just graduated from textile design at GSA this year, and I've been working with John at GSA Sustainability, just to put on some kind of events for students or for sort of designers who are just kind of starting off, all about kind of building a responsible practice in fashion or textile design. So thanks very much to John for letting me do this and for hosting today as well. He is here. So before we sort of start, sort of went over, I guess, the sort of recording issues, but I will introduce everyone as well. So we've got a great panel all lined up today. Everyone's kind of studied at some level or another at GSA, so like either undergrad or on master's courses as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about their sort of experience as students, and then also professional experience, and just kind of generally discuss why it's so important to build a kind of responsible and sustainable sort of practice in, like, as a fashion or textile designer. So yeah, if you've got any questions at all, as I say, just pop them in chat. We can sort of cover them when we've got time at the end. So I'll introduce everyone before I hand it over to them. So first up, we'll have Niki. Niki's a multidisciplinary sustainable designer. She's also a teaching fellow at the Textiles Department at Edinburgh College of Art, and she's the country coordinator for Fashion Revolution Scotland as well. So following Niki, we'll have Cassandra, who is an educator. She teaches sewing through her studio called the Stitchery Studio, and she also co-founded Zero Waste Design Online, and she's a founding member of Sustainable Fashion Scotland as well. We are also joined by Christina Wong as well, who graduated from textile design in 2019. She specialised in woven textiles and now works as a great title, Sourcing and Sustainability Executive for a startup textiles company based in Mauritius. And finally, we are joined by Kelly Tihngang, who is a multi-award winning interdisciplinary designer already. She's graduated this year as well from textile design, and although she specialises in embroidery, Kelly's work kind of combines like technology, robotics, set design, animation, a whole lot of stuff. So yeah, it'll be really exciting to hear from everyone today. So I'll pass it over to Niki to start. Thanks very much.
Hello, hi everybody. Nice to be back at GSA. I mean, it'd be nice to be back in person, but online's good, and it's nice to see people that I've worked with quite a few times across sustainable fashion events. So I think I'll share, I've got some slides. I think it might be better to sort of show the visual here. Okay, so I am Niki Taylor, and I have worked in the fashion industry for many years. I actually studied my undergraduate down in Galashiels at Heriot-Watt University, but I have worked at sort of high street end of fashion, the high end of fashion, and I'm now working as an educator and also country coordinator for Fashion Revolution Scotland. So, which I started here in Scotland about 8 years ago maybe now actually. So anyway, I, after sort of working within the high street as a fashion designer originally, I was really kind of jaded working for the high street, because even back then when I was first kind of in the industry, it was still starting, it was when a lot of factories were shifting away from the UK. And so I actually started to kind of see the sort of loss of industry here in Scotland. And but also designing for the high street, even then it started to kind of start picking up speed. And what I could see was the high street became very bland. And I think that's the thing, when you speed things up, designers have less time to be creative, less time to research. And I do believe that that has had a big impact on what we see in the high street now, is, you know, with weekly collections, designers don't have time to spend to be creative, to think of original ideas. So what we kind of term as fashion now, I kind of think is really unfashionable, purely because it is so bland. There's been a real loss of individuality. So yeah, that was when I started kind of creating my own label, which started out just as a small t-shirt range, but then it kind of grew quite fast, and I ended up sort of selling that in Japan, in Paris, and I did catwalk shows in London and Paris and Japan as well. So it kind of, I've never really planned to set out to do that, but it was a good time. But I did end up being on a bit of a sort of hamster wheel with that, just sort of churning out collections as well. So it's a little bit of a kind of snippet of where that was. That was over 10 years ago now. And something that I think is really important, it's always been sort of important within my practice, is collaboration. And I think it's really important now more than ever that we collaborate. And I certainly see that the community of sustainable designers or responsible designers in Scotland are really supportive of each other's work, and we really promote, and it's a really strong community here, and we've sort of seen that through working with Fashion Evolution, and it's been so encouraging to see that grow year on year. And we have so many designers, businesses, community groups all over Scotland who really are engaged in this now, and yeah, that want to see a kind of better industry for the future, and also to sort of really educate on the huge amount of exploitation within the industry for the environment, and on the people that make our clothes and footwear and textiles. So from maybe about 9 years ago, I sort of decided to sort of change direction, because I was on this hamster wheel, and I set up a sustainable business called The Top Project. And it was really kind of a selection of curated vintage, because I started to kind of realise the real problems within the industry. And I used to go to factories across Asia, kind of mostly, and India, and kind of really seen a lot of the problems firsthand. And I couldn't kind of continue doing that, although I wasn't doing that within my own collection, but still I was kind of started to question the amount of products and the kind of products I was using, and started to kind of learn more about where our products come from and what they are, which kind of really shocked me, when I kind of, even having worked in the industry for so long, so many designers don't actually question what they do and what they use. So that then kind of led me on to, I was at a conference in London just after the Rana Plaza disaster, and a pivotal film, if you've not seen it, The True Cost, I also watched that year. And you can't unsee what you see. And from that moment, I was like, right, okay, we're starting Fashion Evolution in Scotland. So I set that up with another couple of girls here in Scotland. And yeah, the rest is history. So from that, I kind of felt like I wanted to research more about sustainability, and I really wanted to educate more on that. I wanted to become an educator. So I thought the best way to do that would be to go back and spend some dedicated time on that to in education. So I went back to, well, I went to Glasgow School of Art. I did the Masters in Research and Creative Practices, which was actually really kind of fitting for my work because I have collaborated within my own businesses, like with so many different artists and creatives that it just kind of felt like the right kind of mix. So then I was in the fine art department, and actually, although I was investigating and observing what was happening in fashion and documenting what was happening in fashion through my inbox, through observing the high street, I started to realise that there's so many figures of, like, you know, millions and billions of tons of waste within the industry. There's so many stats, but actually we just can't visualize that. And how do we make it easier for people to understand that, you know, because, you know, we hear these figures and we're like, wow, that's like unbelievable, or that, you know, it's such a lot, but we have no idea what that looks like. So I started to kind of really visually document, and I think that's where my work kind of really sort of turned. This was me actually visualising it for real in Scotland, up at a place called Nathan's Waste Savers. You can see in the background the piles, bales and bales of clothes that we throw out in Scotland. And I started to kind of, these piles on the left are like like, it was actually wallpaper that I ended up making to sort of show how many tons we use. So this was part of an exhibition in Glasgow where I got wallpaper printed, and each sort of pile you can see was about 1 ton of clothing. And then I kind of replicated that on the wall because I couldn't actually fill a space with the amount of waste that we use in Scotland. I also was sort of looking at, this was another exhibition in Glasgow, which was really about those who lost their lives at the Rana Plaza disaster. And when I was sort of doing some research, further research into that, it came to light that, you know, these people were like just a number, and there was no documentation of the people who actually lost their lives. So I wanted to kind of highlight so you can see in the window of the gallery was I made this wooden frame as a sort of memorial piece, and on the label, which you can see on the right, because I wanted to put their names, so I kind of I put like mother, daughter, son, auntie, uncle, you know, to kind of highlight that these are actually real people that lost their lives. They're not numbers. And I printed that 1138 to commemorate those who lost their lives. Then I started deconstructing. I think when I first started, my plan was, when I went back to GSA, that I would create a sustainable collection at some point. And I think the more I was kind of getting further into kind of knowing more and finding out more, I couldn't actually create clothes. So something that I feel is very important is using the waste streams that we have. And in fact, waste is not really the right word, because we do waste so much textiles, even within the industry. Like, lots of designers throw out ends of rolls, which, you know, rolls and rolls of materials, but it is actually an amazing resource. So we need to really look at waste as a resource. And that's where I started. First of all, when I was at GSA, I started looking at my own wardrobe and the own waste within, like, you know, sort of critiquing my own habits, and decided to deconstruct my own wardrobe. And then actually the image here on the left, I made like a video. Actually, the video, I kind of went undercover in Selfridges in London, and with a like hidden camera, and Primark in Oxford Street on Black Friday, which was kind of fun. So I made a kind of video of that. which is quite scary, really, when you sort of really stand back and observe what people do at Black Friday. Particularly like kind of looking at Primark, how that's become like a big supermarket with like, you know, people with trolleys just filling up stuff with clothing. So anyway, and then I also for a whole year documented what all the deals and sales and the marketing that kind of comes to us with fashion. This was my degree show where I'm actually there as well with an outfit on with all of these marketing materials that came through my inbox in that year. And then I started to look at try and slow down my own practice. So I deconstructed my wardrobe and slowly reconstructed it. And kind of through that process of slowing down, I actually realised that the thought process is better. And that's like a proven thing, that actually when we're making and doing things with our hands, that it kind of helps activate. And I think something about slowing down makes us more creative. So that was kind of really quite good in informing my research at the time. And this is just more observations. I started, before lockdown, I started observing like clothing that had been lost or found or thrown away in Glasgow. I would go out during lockdown. I kept that up when I was going out for a cycle or a walk, and it was quite interesting to sort of see the changes that happened through the last couple of years. And then more recently, through trying to kind of promote or kind of actually create conversation, I would say, around the visuals. So I collaborate quite often with an artist called Sandy Garbutt. We've collaborated for many, many years. And this is me in these costumes. So these are deconstructed pieces from my wardrobe that I've reconstructed. And they're basically like, I suppose, conversation pieces. I think the visual is so important in communicating and understanding. So I think art and design has a really important part to play. I think art for the visual, but I think also as designers, you know, I would say I don't design anymore. I'm quite happy about that, but I definitely use my design thinking as a way of kind of creating better and to maybe create more value in the work that I do and understanding. But yeah, and I think these pieces are really meant to create like stories. They're actually filmed. Sorry, the picture on the left is at the Bings in West Lothian. So it's about the Bings, basically, where I grew up, were just like a sort of monument for the area. And actually looking further into that, you know, it's like waste from the oil industry when we used to have mines in West Lothian. And so the real conversation pieces about, one, what's in our clothes and how we make our clothes. So like the polyester coming from derivative of oil. And so really, yeah, just really to have a sort of deeper understanding of where our materials come from. And then this is me again on the Bings this is actually just playing about with a outfit that was made from packaging waste. And this is again just looking at different locations. This is a forest that's a forestry commission forest that's been kind of getting chopped down. And my current research is around creating sustainable textiles in Scotland. So looking at nettles. So we know nettles can grow in industrial estates. So it's really trying to create how do we create a future for the textiles and fashion industry in Scotland? But something that's really important to me is the environmental crisis, to take environmental action. And I've been doing a lot of research around original crops that we can use to create a more biodiverse soil here in Scotland. So I've been working with the Soil Association and other kind of bodies to look at the possibility of growing nettles thistles and flax to make more biodegradable textiles. And these are just some pictures that have been taken around Glasgow to show that they can grow in abundance, and actually they don't take the water like cotton would. So it's about trying to kind of look at other ways to create that sort of responsible materials. That's me. I hope that was 10 minutes.
That was great, Niki. Thank you very much. It's brilliant.
Sharon.
You just don't know what's on your doorstep, do you? That's really interesting. Yeah. Perfect. I'll pass it over to Cassandra now, but as I say, if anyone's got questions for Niki, you can pop them in the chat or save them till later as well.
Great. Thanks, Megan. I'm just going to share my screen. And okay, cool. Can everyone see my kind of full screen presentation there? Is that good? Yeah, great. I'm just going to move, hold on, to the side. So yeah, my name is Cassandra Bellanger. I'm a Master's of Design, Fashion Textiles graduate, graduated in 2019. And my collection and my kind of whole year was looking at zero waste fashion design. Oh, oop, hold on. I'm opening Spotify rather than going to the next slide. Hold on. Okay, so basically I see my work as an invitation to step into a more sustainable future. It challenges home sewists, designers, and educators to think through the social and environmental impacts of their practice. And I explored issues like, as I said, zero waste, transparency, so looking at the need for transparency in the fashion industry as well, feminism, sizeism, and kind of body image in the industry, and how a lot of kind of fashion marketing has had a huge impact on, I guess, body image, particularly for women, but not solely. And so I also explored the idea of color therapy as well in my work. It's something that I kind of came across during my year. I struggled a bit with depression and anxiety, and just found that working with color was something that really helped. Okay. So one of the things I was looking at as well is kind of overproduction, overconsumption. And I really like this quote by Liz Ricketts, who recently taught a fashion and waste class for the Slow Factory. If you don't know about the Slow Factory, incredible organization, highly recommend checking out their classes. They're open source, really great resource. She says, we produce more than we consume more than we can use, and therefore we waste. And one of the things that I didn't want to do during my collection was you know, just consume more virgin materials. And so I attempted to, very similar, I guess, to the approach that Niki has taken in some ways, is deconstruct parts of my wardrobe or those family members as well in my embarrassingly big, and but you know, forced myself to use what I had already. And I wanted to look at patchworking. So I have a kind of long history in my family of patchworking. My mom and my grandmother both do patchwork quilting, and I wanted to kind of use that and build up textiles that way. I was doing a lot of research into zero waste fashion design. I had previously worked with Holly McQuillan, who wrote Zero Waste Fashion Design with Tima Risanen. And while I was trying to kind of find resources and ways of working, I just found it a bit difficult, I guess, to access resources around zero waste fashion design apart from this one book. And so I applied for a grant through the Sustainability in Action Fund to bring Holly McQuillan for a week to GSA, and we did a week of workshops with some of the educators, students. There was a panel discussion, lecture, and that really informed my practice a lot for kind of the direction that I went in my collection. So I just thought I'd talk a little bit about what is zero waste fashion design as well. I've been teaching about zero waste fashion design for the last 2 years, and I'll talk a bit more about what I'm doing now. But just to kind of bring into context what I'm talking about, my favorite explanation of what it is by Holly McQuillan, and it's says zero waste fashion design addresses inefficiency in fabric use by reframing waste as an opportunity to explore the magic of making clothes. So really about reframing waste and looking at creative ways in which we can use it. So some of the context behind in the industry. So 15% of the fabric wasted comes from the cutting stage. So per garment that's created in the industry, about 15%, and actually it's potentially much higher than 15%, but we know this is a minimum. So that's per garment at the cutting room stage. And of that, 60 billion square meters of fabric is wasted annually. So 10%, only 10% of that is recycled, 8% of that is reused, 25% of that is incinerated, which obviously has big impacts on the climate, and then 57% goes to landfill. And unfortunately, because we export so much of our charity shop secondhand clothing to the global south, a lot of our overconsumption habits, textiles that end up going to the charity shop end up in the global south in landfills there, where they don't even have the proper infrastructure to deal with it. So okay, sorry. Okay, next one. So yeah, basically fashion is one of the most polluting industries. And it's important to know that 80% of the garment's environmental impact is actually generated by the fabric itself. So how we use the fabric is really, really important. And I just wanted to show you an example. So this is a female t-shirt, kind of very generic piece of clothing. And this is what's called an industry marker. So this shows a layout for an industry marker in multiple sizes, which is often how it's done. And you can see all the kind of black negative space here is waste. And in this example here, this equates to 25% cutting room, or sorry, 25% cutting waste. So even with this small amount of space that you can see, it's still 25%. So it's a huge problem. So to get onto my kind of graduate year and what I spent time looking at, I started by looking at kind of historical examples in zero waste. Pre-industrial revolution, we tended not to waste textiles as much. It took a lot more effort to make cloth, and therefore we kind of valued it more. And it was just really interesting to look at historically at different examples of patterns. So some from different cultures, so Chinese, these Chinese trousers, a Japanese kimono on the right, which is probably one of the most well-known examples of zero waste. The actual cloth is woven often to the width of the person that it's being made for. And you can see just made in panels here. So from there, I just kind of explored some different ideas or different methodologies for zero waste. And this is just kind of playing around with shapes. So as you can see, the pattern itself has no textile waste whatsoever. This actually creates two dresses, which were part of my final collection. And I was introduced, when Holly came for that week, she introduced me to Clo 3D, which is a computer-aided design software program if you're a fashion and textile student and needing to obviously work with patterns and make samples and things. This is a way that you can kind of approach making samples or toiles without making any waste. So I wanted to basically toile my whole collection digitally and therefore create no waste. And this is one of my patchwork pieces that I was able to scan and import into Clo and then drape fully on an avatar that was made to the measurements of my model. While I was doing research, I also came across this quote, which fed a lot into kind of where my research went. It's by Roxane Gay, who's a feminist writer, and she said, when we talk about the needs of women, we need to consider the other identities we inhabit. We are not just women. We are people with different bodies, gender expressions, faiths, sexualities, class backgrounds, and so much more. We need to take into account these differences and how they affect us and how much we account for what we have, as much as we account for what we have in common. And without this kind of inclusion, our feminism is nothing. So I looked a lot at kind of, I guess, intersectionality and approach to my collection. So one of the things, not shockingly, unfortunately, when I started using Clo is this was the kind of standard avatar on the left. So, size 6 to 8, UK size 6 to 8, really small and not at all representative of the standard size kind of 16, which you can see on the right. So UK's dress size 16 women's wear. So you can kind of see the difference and just that kind of body representation and the impact that it has on our mental health as well. So one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to make my collection for average body sizes. I wanted to make it wearable and also be kind of more inclusive by including sizes that have been kind of more excluded from fashion through sizeism. So I did a photo shoot and I used those images to develop the kind of silhouette and the shapes for my collection. And then, excuse me, I managed to find a software program that I could download on my phone and 3D body scan my model and import that into Clo. So these are just two of the models I used, and I was then able to actually cut and drape my patterns in Clo on my models. So obviously just really innovative technology. And then so I was on my kind of way working in the GSA computer lab on a really nice powerful computer that allowed me to use Clo. And then this happened. And so yeah, I was there when the fire happened, and for about 15 weeks, all of my work, like fabrics and stuff I had planned to use, were stuck in the Reed building. And so we had to kind of rethink everything. And I decided to basically defer and do a whole nother semester. But in the meantime, I wanted to be part of the degree show. So I did a kind of little small collection of underwear. I collaborated with my friend Lydia of What Lydia Made, and we did a collection of undergarments made from, again, textiles from each model's own wardrobe. And that was a work that I showed. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a drink of water. This was my degree show. So I talked a bit about obviously zero waste and the work that I'd done up to that point, exploring silhouette and the use of kind of garments from the wardrobe of friends and family. When we finally got back in and I started my kind of last semester, I managed to get back all the clothes and bits of textiles that I wanted to use for my final collection. So this was a skirt on the top left that was my mom's when she was a teenager. This was my tutor Dan's shirt that he gave to me. So obviously incorporating bits into my textiles, which kind of brought kind of further meaning in their association. But because I'd kind of moved away from using Clo just with the so kind of applying my zero waste designs to paper, cutting out and playing with different kind of configurations of textiles through paper models like this. So I played around a bit until I found what textile kind of configuration I wanted for my dresses there. And the other thing I did, because at this point I did need to toile my collection or sample my collection, and I wasn't using Clo at this point, is I tried to make wearable toiles. So instead of making toiles from calico that I know I'd have to waste, I used kind of fabrics that I already had in my collection and made clothing that I could give to friends or sell off after rather than be wasted. This is some images of my final collection. These are my 2 zero waste dresses. So my whole collection is zero waste. The dresses were zero waste patterns, and the rest of the collection had kind of were more minimal waste, but I used different methods. So for the jacket, I actually built up the textile to the shape of the pattern piece. And then some of the textiles used in the jacket and the kimono here were kind of leftover pieces from the previous garment. So I'd finish one piece and then I'd kind of incorporate some of those scraps into the next piece. So just looking at how my collection utilized sustainable processes, as I talked about, it was intersectional in practice. I looked at zero waste methodologies. It showed it was possible to design a collection without any kind of new fibers as well. It was collaborative as well. There's a lot of kind of looking at transparency, it engaged with inclusivity, and new kind of sustainable design theories. It provided resources for students and staff, engaged with activism and community, and it also left a bit of a legacy for others that came next through some of the work that I did with Fashion Revolution as a student ambassador when I was there, and then chaired and founded the Responsive Art and Design Society, which Christina was on. So she was finishing her last year of her undergrad while I did my master's, and we did a lot of projects together through GSA Sustainability. These are just some of the events that we ran during the year together with the team. We had a really incredible team. And also Niki, we did some Fashion Revolution projects with Niki. And here's some lovely images of some of our time, some of the projects and events, workshops that we ran. So the top left is the Zero Waste Fashion Week. And we've got some panel discussions and Fashion Revolution. And we did some kind of peer reviews in the society. Yeah, what I'm up to now. So I'm still running the Stitchery, teaching sewing courses and workshops with a focus on sustainable making practices. As Megan mentioned, I'm founding member of Sustainable Fashion Scotland, which is a community-led social venture with a mission to connect the fashion community in Scotland. And we run kind of community calls and workshops and a book club. And then I've also co-founded Zero Waste Design Online, which is an international collective that develops online educational resources in the field of zero waste designs and systems thinking for fashion. This idea for this organization actually came out of my time at GSA, just like wanting to offer resources to other students, knowing that there would be other students like me who wanted access to zero waste. And it was actually co-founded with Holly McQuillan, so she's one of our co-founders as well. Mylène Loguilot, who's based in France, also zero waste designer and minimal waste design lead for Decathlon, and Danielle Elsener, who graduated from RCA last year, with her zero waste kind of systems and pattern masters that she developed. So we're all kind of really passionate about zero waste, and we wanted to bring kind of all our resources together for those that are interested in learning more. And we just launched our first e-learning class called Making the Grade, which is looking at zero waste grading strategies if you're interested. And I'm also going to be offering a workshop for GSA students, fashion and textile students, on November 23rd, which is just an introduction to zero waste design. So if you're interested, we'll provide some more information probably next week with booking. And then excitingly, I'm also currently working on a project for COP26. So we collaborated to put in an application to show for a creative installation at COP26, and we were accepted. And so we basically got this life-size bar chart, which kind of shows waste from pre-consumer to post-consumer, and just kind of brings to light the issues of waste in the fashion industry. So that is something that's keeping me very busy at the moment. And that's me. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, let me know. Hopefully I didn't go too far over, but.
Yeah, absolutely great. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. You've got so much going on. That's great.
Very busy.
I'll pop in the chat as well after the talks. I'll pop in the chat like some links to, let's say, Zero Waste Design Online, all those kind of things, so everyone can sort of get access to them. Yeah. I'll hand over to Christina now. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. I'll just stop sharing my video just in case there's any connection issues. So let me just share my screen. I'm not really sure how to share the PowerPoint. Just give me a second. Okay. Is it good? Yeah, so I graduated in textiles in 2019, and when I left the UK, I actually went to India before coming back home here in Mauritius last year. So I worked as a textile designer in Bangalore for about a year, and then COVID happened. So I wanted to talk more about my experience as being a student at GSA and how I started the course. So I think I struggled a bit in my first 3 years at uni, just figuring out what's really my expertise, what do I have to offer. I'm someone really driven by purpose, and I think at that time I wasn't sure how textile could, like bring something good to the community, to the world, and it was just like testing design, really about design skills rather than having a meaningful purpose. Until in 2016, I met the company based in Edinburgh, Calopsia Collective. So they were giving a workshop about zero waste fashion. It was organized by Zero Waste Scotland. And that's how I learned about the industry. And obviously with GSA sustainability, I got a bit more involved. So through my work, I felt I had a responsibility to find solutions where there were problems and also to give something back to the community. I think as a textile designer, we don't really feel that important sometimes. We're not engineers, we're not doctors, we're not scientists, we're not saving the world. And it was a big realization after I graduated about how much more I could have done. So I really like this quote from Lee Eldercourt, who teaches at Parsons School of Design. And she's really about bringing back knowledge through textiles and pushing students to go beyond just design, but really looking at innovation, engineering, science, and combining all forms of knowledge together to reinvent textiles. And while I was doing my research for my final year collection, I realized that I have no idea where my materials are coming from. I haven't seen a cotton plant at that point in my life. We talk about viscose, acrylic, we don't know where they're coming from which country they're coming from, is it even grown in the UK? How is it made, how long it takes to make the fiber. So for me, it was really to investigate the role of textiles through materials. Because also I encountered terms about zero waste. I wanted to incorporate my work at zero waste in my work. So my whole idea was to create zero waste garment through woven textiles, so fully woven garments, so without any sewing. Obviously, I didn't have time to do it. Exploring the fibers itself took the whole year of the fourth year. So I would really encourage students from now on, whatever year you are, first or final year, use all opportunities at GSA to research about fibers. There's so much more we can do as textile designers than just designing textiles. We can design solutions. As Cassandra mentioned, there's so much waste in the design process, and her responsibility as a fashion designer is to reduce that waste. But what we can do as textile designers is to eliminate all the waste and also the unfair practices of the supply chain from the textiles. And it's really through research. You can find organic cotton, for example. It's becoming more accessible now. Even secondhand yarns. There's a shop, I think, in Manchester. So I actually went there for my final year with some other students, and we got secondhand yarns, but also thinking again beyond conventional textiles. And Lee Eldercourt always talks about how textile acts like a blueprint of society. So it tells us about our time. And I think if we had to look at the blueprint of textiles now, future generations would just be surprised, like how did we keep living that way, knowing all the damage that textiles is doing to the world. So my contribution in my field of study was to really choose the right materials, but also to exploit the natural behavior of materials. For example, I participated in the Bradford wool competition in my final year, and it was about looking at British wool again. And there's so much potential in that fiber, and we don't know how to exploit that. For example, we use polyester to make any 3D textiles. There's always a reason why we use a specific fiber and why not the other one. But as textile designers, I don't think we're aware of the impact these decisions can have from the design process. So I really used my final year work to go in depth in research and what is tencel, where's tencel coming from, how is it processed, how much chemicals goes in production, and also because tier 2, so the supply chain is into 4 tiers. From the first one, raw material, second, the making of the fabric, the third, making of the garment, and then the fourth, it's the distribution. So the tier 2, which is the raw material making, is actually the most chemically intensive part of the process. It uses so much water, more than even making the garments, and that's in the dyeing, processing the fabric, even making the yarn, spinning the yarn, takes so much energy, water, and chemicals. And as textile designers, I do think we have a responsibility how we choose these fibers. So this is what I tried to do in my collection. So my collection was without any synthetic fibers, but also I wanted to still show the innovative techniques we could do with natural fibers, like 3D textiles. 3D textile was so trendy at that time. And I love 3D, anything that's 3D. And for me to show that we could accomplish way more with sustainable fibers is the best way to seduce people. Just saying that sustainability is important, that's correct, but also showing the opportunities that sustainability provides us. So after I graduated, as I mentioned, I went to India and then I came back home. So I'm currently working for a startup called Abana, and I'm not a designer anymore. I'm the sourcing and sustainability executive. So our role is to help buyers worldwide connect with African factories. So I'm currently designing our sustainable strategies and designing all the communication, but I'm more involved in meeting the factories and creating these connections between different industry actors. So for example, I got to visit amazing denim factories. This picture is actually 100% natural dyes denim, which is just amazing. And then I also saw the laser machines, and it was just really interesting how many processes there are behind the scenes. We may buy a pair of jeans, but it has to go through so many hands before reaching the shops. And I didn't include much of my work in this presentation because I also wanted to talk about the holistic approach of being a student. I think that what really got me here is not only the design course, but I'm not sure how it's called now, the foci, I'm not sure. So all the research and dissertation, even volunteering with Riyadh Society, working with John, really equipped me to become who I am now. And working in the industry, I get the full overview of the supply chain. I'm seeing the real challenges of the industry. For example, it might not make much sense. I wasn't aware of that when I was a student, but for example, free trade agreements are very important in how countries compete with each other. So for example, Cassandra, you mentioned secondhand clothing going to the global south, and this is causing a horrible issue in Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda, because it's just flooding the landfills, destroying all the local industries, and it's actually the US doing that. And when Rwanda opposed the US and said, we don't want any of your secondhand clothing anymore, the US removed Rwanda from a trade agreement, which is also affecting the local industry. So currently I'm more dealing with the socio-political aspect of the industry, and it's way less designing, but also Niki mentioned design thinking. I think as a student, this is my biggest lesson of all these 4 years. It's actually all the transferable skills I learned at GSA rather than my design skills. This was something that Jimmy mentioned, I think it was in 2019, that sustainability shouldn't aggress, I think, if that's the right word, but it should seduce. I remember the first time Jimmy said that, I was like, oh, it can't be right, because sustainability is what's right. I don't need to seduce anyone to make it happen. But working on the ground in Mauritius, in India, I realized that the world is not as perfect as we wanted it, and people are not as, collaborative and just as we would want them to. So that was my biggest lesson going through GSA, is yeah, we need to be prepared for these challenges, and anything we can do in any profession we are, whether we're designer, entrepreneur, educator, we have the power to change things. So I just want to end on a positive note. I actually was a Fashion Revolution volunteer. So this year I collaborated with factories in Mauritius and Madagascar. It's not much, but just sharing about Fashion Revolution, trying to get them take pictures with a poster and also sharing it on social media. We shared it with the buyers we're in contact with, and really just to highlight the social compliance and innovative commitments by a lot of factories here in Africa. And my dissertation really came very helpful in my role. I studied the impact of cotton on India. So kind of all ties in my foci research, my volunteering, my design course. It really helped me in my job right now. And I just wanted to use this time to share about how being a student right now, I can imagine it's just a roller coaster with COVID, but make use of any resources you have right now at uni and try to work with John as much as possible. There's Fashion Revolution. There's so many ways as designers we can make impact, and it goes way beyond just designing fabric. It's about finding solutions from a socio-economic perspective. Niki, it's amazing what you're doing with the nettle in Glasgow. And it's so funny because in my first year I was thinking, do I really want to design? And here I am, I'm not designing anymore, but I think I'm using my design thinking. So yeah, I just wanted to quickly share about my journey from a student, design, volunteering, and where I am right now, to really try to open all opportunities for students and really think outside. It's so cheesy to say outside of the box, but really there's so many ways you can use your design skills right now and research skills to have impact at uni and Scotland and the whole world. So yeah.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. Yeah, it shows us what else you can do outside your sort of practice, I guess, as a student as well. Cool. I'll pass it over to Kelly now.
Hi, can everybody hear me? I'm just gonna turn my video off as well, and I will share my screen and then I will get started. Okay, so building a sustainable practice. Like Megan said, I have just graduated a couple of months ago, so this is still a question that I'm answering for myself, and I think everyone else will agree that it is an evolving question. Like I don't know that anyone has cracked how to make the perfect sustainable practice. But this is what I've sort of done so far. So me, I'm a Glasgow-based freelance interdisciplinary designer. I graduated in textiles, but I ended up not really making lengths of fabric. I ended up sort of using textile processes and mixing them with moving image, video and animation. So I did my undergrad at GSA, and I actually previously studied fashion at Kingston, but I dropped out after a year, and there was a multitude of factors with that, but one of them was not wanting to make clothes. And from since I was really young, I always wanted to be a fashion designer. And that was kind of my whole identity up until I actually started studying fashion and realizing that I didn't necessarily want to be making or contributing to the amount of stuff out there in the world. So I truly feel like if you're not, you know, a massively passionate, talented fashion designer, which I really wasn't, you shouldn't be contributing to just the amount of stuff. So it took me a little while, but textiles, I realized, was where my passion and my talent actually lay. So that's when I joined Glasgow School of Art, and I joined in second year. And also I'm a part-time milliner, which means I make lots of fancy ladies' hats, which is unrelated to sustainability, but something about me. So for my final year project, I created a collection called Useless Machines. So basically in summer 2020, we were in lockdown 1, I believe, and there was a resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. So obviously that's something that I've had lived experience of for my whole life, but it did ignite new research into different ways that Black people's lives could be affected by racism still. And so one of the ways that I found was climate colonialism, which can be defined as any instance where a former colony pays the environmental price for the activities of a former colonizer, which is what I ended up writing my dissertation about. So I became interested specifically in electronic waste dumping. So that's where old phones and laptops are sort of the most understandable example, but mainly it's industrial waste. So from corporations get dumped in poorer countries in the global south. And I specifically chose to focus on this practice happening in Ghana, because there's a lot of instances of climate colonialism, like with the charity shop waste exports that everyone's been talking about. Ghana, as a former colony of Britain, seems to be paying a lot of the price for our overconsumption. So yeah, that's what I ended up writing my dissertation about. And while I was doing my research on this, I collected a lot of e-waste myself. And I actually became really interested in the colors and the textures and the shapes and the sort of ugly but beautiful combinations of those. So my dissertation research ended up feeding into my actual studio work. So I got lots of laptop motherboards from eWaste Solutions on Argyle Street. If anyone is looking for e-waste or looking to speak to anyone, any recyclers of e-waste. And I've got lots and lots of photographs of them, and just started a bank of primary research from that. So then another strand of what I was collecting was waste packaging. It seemed that every time I bought something, be it a printer or a pair of scissors or clothing, it seemed to come with a massive amount of plastic waste, polystyrene waste, cardboard waste, whatever it was. So I collected bits of that and I painted them up, and I made these installations where I tried to recreate some of the shapes and compositions from the e-waste research. So this one in particular, I was trying to get these rounded rectangles and these sort of strips in this installation. And then I created vectors from these in Illustrator, sort of copying them in a lot of detail. And then I chopped these up and rearranged them completely, so I could form a completely new composition, but it still had that tie to the e-waste. So from this, so I was really interested in the idea of animated textiles. My thinking was that if someone had the scientific or the textiles know-how to do this, that would be a massive way to reduce textiles waste, because you could have your one t-shirt that could animate into any pattern that you wanted or change color and things like that. But I kind of gave up on that idea because I didn't really have much self-belief in my ability to create that. So I was talking to Jimmy about that, and Jimmy and my course leader, Susan, said that I should try and create animated textiles of some description, even if it's very, very analog. So from that, I decided to make a collection of useless machines. So these would be moving objects that mimicked the movements of machinery and had the same colors and shapes and textures that I'd researched in my primary research, but have no function whatsoever. And this was kind of my comment on the huge amount of useful technology that is manufactured every year, but ends up in landfills, oftentimes before their end of life, just because we can't be bothered to properly fix them. So it's not quite animated textiles, but it's using movement and using textiles and trying to combine the two. So to get these, I took some of my digital drawings, flipped elements of them to kind of create symmetrical kind of machine-like designs, which would then be laser cut and wrapped in found fabrics. And I used cardboard and paper to just create little movement experiments to see how I could actually make this look like you've pressed a button and the machine has sprung to life. So that was how I looked at the movement. In terms of the color and the texture, I took some of my favorite elements from my primary research and made little collages out of those, and then went and found materials which was close to those as I could find. So I was kind of buying acrylics, I was finding stuff in my house already, I was painting things, but it kind of transpired that a lot of the really unique materials, unique colors and textures that I was drawn to initially, you can't really just find lying around. So I had to kind of make them. So I think, like most textile students, I had a big hoard of fabrics and materials. And I also had a lot of things left over from all the projects that I'd done in the 2 years up to final year. I sort of thought, instead of accumulating more and more waste, let me dive into that waste, use the found fabrics from charity shops and old projects and turn them into the materials I was going to use. So this is just a small selection of some of the ways that I did that, but I transformed fabrics by painting them, by ironing them, by putting them under a heat press, layering them with other fabrics with different opacities, layering glue under that and then ironing on top of it, bleaching, burning, embroidering on top of, scratching into, just anything to take the initial plain fabric into something which is completely unique and completely esoteric. Moving back, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but just moving back into the making, I got my prototypes laser cut in the studio, in the workshop. And this bit, I would say, I was quite disappointed with from a sustainability point of view, because during the pandemic, I don't know if it's the same at the minute, but you could only get things laser cut once a week and pick them up once a week. So usually when you could just walk in and out, I would make a small test laser cutting, see if that worked, and then do that before I moved on to committing to a whole large, A0 sheet of MDF. But because I couldn't do that, and obviously there's a time limit, I had to just sort of chance it, get a massive amount of things cut, pick them up, and see if they worked. And there were a lot of mistakes, considering that I'm not, like a product designer. I had only been doing textiles up to that point. So I realized later that it would have been so much better to test out all these movements in cardboard beforehand. So I don't know how relevant that is to fashion students, because I don't know, you might be making clothes out of wood, who knows, but definitely toiling them in a more easily recyclable or more easily disposable material would have been better. But these are just some visuals of how I actually put these together and the first prototypes that I made. And so with the final collection, I'd figured out how I was going to make all the movements. I'd figured out how I was going to edit and personalize all the fabrics. And so I made a collection of 9 useless machines. So what you're actually going to see is just 6 of them. 3 of them I wasn't so happy about, but I think like with any collection of lengths of fabric, there would be some which weren't so successful, but this just translates more into objects. And you can just see a little description of what they're all made of underneath. And these were the second half of the collection. So I was really happy with how they looked. From a photographic standpoint, they're very graphic. And they still kind of count as textiles. They're kind of textile panels, moving textile panels, but I definitely think of them more as objects. And this is a very grainy video of how they actually all move. So to actually affect the movement, I basically just use invisible thread to pull them apart or twist them round or move them up and down. And then videoed that and then created GIFs out of those. So the idea of these was that they are useless machines, but they're going to be kept forever, as opposed to, you know, the latest iPhone or iMac or whatever that you might replace when the next one comes out. So even though they don't have a function, they're going to stay with you, or me, I guess. And so also to go alongside the physical collection, I created an ad campaign. So I got my brother involved, he's an actor, so that was very handy for me, and created some stills and then also a video, like infomercial. And that was something I really wanted to touch on because I think you can also incorporate sustainability into the narrative of your work or your practice or your collection, as well as just the materials. I think when Christina was talking about seducing the consumer, that was really, really important. Sustainability isn't the sexiest word, even though it should be, obviously. But if you can get people seduced by a funny video or by some really interesting colors and textures and make them want to look closer and then read the blurb next to it and realize, oh, actually, this is informing me about electronic waste dumping, or this is teaching me about the fiber content of my clothes and where this comes from. If you can do that, then that is one way to sort of change consumer habits, hopefully. And one of the hopes for me with the Useless Machines project is that it would inform consumers about a problem which I don't think is spoken about enough. So that's nearly finished. I'll just let him get to the end of his dancing about. Right, there you go. Right, so what I'm up to now. So I am currently freelancing as a designer, working on a couple of different projects. So I'm working on a promotional video for the Dial Tone project. So they're a charity that collect old phones and distribute them to sex workers. So again, looking at electronic waste, but this time looking at what we can do with it. Rather than just toss it into landfill. I'm doing a few infographics for Living Rent. That's a tenants union that you should all join, especially students, basically looking out for tenants' rights. I'm doing a stop motion advert for a company called La Bonne Excuse. They're a wine and book subscription box. Stop motion is something that I'm getting into a lot more and that I realized would have been quite handy during my final project for getting clearer video or clearer imagery for all the movements. And yeah, also a couple of different projects. So it's obviously really early in my career. I've only graduated in June. I've still got my part-time job, just for like a steady income. And also for next year, I've got a master's place in Camberwell for a course called Designer Maker. So if everything goes horribly wrong and I've made no money, then I will go and do that. But the ideal is to be a freelancer and be happy and be making some sort of money. And I'm also currently developing a new project called Brand New Useless Machines, which is taking the useless machines and scaling them up into a full body size, which will use bodily movements to create the mechanized movements. So I'm collaborating with Type 1 Studios to incorporate virtual reality and projection mapping into this. So projection mapping is basically when you have a 3D object and then different textures or visuals are projected onto it, even when this is moving. And so that's another element which really interests me, because virtual fashion, virtual try-ons, virtual environments are one really interesting way that we can sort of be producing less stuff and pumping less physical stuff into the market, and actually still be providing that experience and still be providing the world of fashion, but without actually making new clothes, which I think really interests me. And I think having wanted to be a fashion designer, to then going on to study textiles, to now wanting to be more in the moving image space, I think it's important to realize that you can be in the fashion industry and not have to be contributing to not overconsumption, what's the word, overproduction. Yeah, you don't have to be contributing to overproduction. You can come at it from so many different angles. So that's one thing that I'm certain of. Everything else in life and career, completely uncertain, but that's one thing. So yeah, that is me.
Thank you so much. You've got so much coming up as well. That's really exciting. Can't wait to see what you do. Cool. I don't know if anyone's got any questions.